Everyone, welcome back to another powerful episode of AIBiz. I'm your host Avik, and today we are stepping into the fascinating world where technology meets human challenges and AI in large scale code bases and the realities of onboarding developers in today's market. Yeah. So, joining me is the lovely guest, Francesco Hayes. So, welcome to the show, Francisco.
Hey, yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me, Avik.
Amazing. So, dear listeners, before we delve deep into the discussion, I'll quickly love to introduce you with Francisco. So, dear listeners, he is a brilliant mind who builds impactful websites for the organizations who are driving real change, like whether in the healthcare, nonprofits, or the private equity. So, he doesn't just design, he listens, translates vision into the digital reality, and delivers solutions that are bold, scalable, and truly transformational. So, I'll not take much of your time, dear listeners. Let's get started. Welcome to the show again, Francisco.
Yeah, of course.
Amazing. So, Francisco, like when we talk about AI in the software, like most people imagine the shiny new apps, but the truth is, like, a lot of innovation has to happen with the massive and existing code bases. So, how do you see AI helping developers navigate and also, um, like, walk within these complex, sometimes decades old systems?
Yeah, whether they're old or young, I think it can vary. However, AI, I first see it kind of tackling a lot of the documentation side of things, which I believe a lot of people are starting to see today with how easy it is for AI to look at single code file, be able to kind of get an idea of what's going on and be able to document and or build test cases for it. So
Mm.
in that case, I see it having a huge benefit there, especially as you're dealing with different developers, different backgrounds, different ways of going about things, and onboarding and deboarding. It makes it much more easier to kind of maintain and contain
Mhm.
different ways for you to be able to like document the
Yeah,
code base.
exactly. Hmm. So, like, and like when AI encounters kind of messy or undocumented code, do you think that it's more of a savior or a liability?
I mean, when it comes to the liability that comes with AI, I think we have to be very judicious with it in the sense of like we we're still not at the point, and I don't necessarily even know if we will reach the point, or at least
Mm.
to where we completely trust it in the sense of it won't be human reviewed. Especially
Mm.
depending on the system that you're working. Like maybe if you're working on a low impact project in the sense of like the data that it's processing and dealing with, then maybe the review process would be less. But within fields such as like healthcare, government, wherever security and or the use cases is very high and the impact it has on the end user,
Mm.
review is going to be needed for sure. And in that sense, like, you know, you're going to have to be aware of its liability, which it plays. However, uh, you know, outside of that sense, it's very convenient. You can run it. There have been projects that I've been a part of where it's able to kind of help document and help look at complicated sets of code and be able to help onboard other developers. There have been a number of projects where I've been tasked with almost like a cleanup. So I'll come on to startups where it's post MVP and they're just needing someone to clean up the code and help lower their costs because they're spending like tens of thousands of dollars on management costs for their servers and stuff when it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. And so, I've gone on and there have been times where, you know, and there's like no, maybe they hired an agency, maybe they hired off this one-off developer and now he's gone and there's really no, and they might have not documented it. And there's really no one to talk to on just what's going on here. And I take pride in coming onto those projects because a lot of times developers would be like, "No way, Jose, like, there's no way in heck I'm gonna take on this task." But, it has its fun in the sense of, like, deciphering and figuring out what the previous developer was thinking and what they were doing here. And I've seen how AI can really help decipher that and help, review such things, especially when the code base can be pretty large. And as long as it kind of fits within that context window, of course, then, it can be very beneficial.
Exactly. Hmm. And like, uh, I mean, definitely, it's really fascinating. Like, it's almost kind of what to say reframes like AI as a bridge, connecting legacy with modernity, giving the developers a chance to focus on the strategy instead of firefighting bugs, right? So I really like that perspective. So, uh, I mean,
Yeah.
in this, yeah, yeah, please, please.
Oh, yeah, and sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I mean,
That's all. Yeah.
whether it's tackling bugs or bringing clarity, it can vary. I find myself debugging more now due to AI, if anything, and because, it's still just you still have these, like, infinite loops that happen with AI, whether it's a prompting issue or not. You know, the fact is that the majority of developers, at least that I'm overseeing and interacting with, are are encountering issues where AI just still can't debug these large code bases because the context window is too large. Like we're dealing with 70, for example, I have one project that has around like 70,000 plus lines of code, and the context window, it just can't take in everything, and it struggles because it might fix one bug in one area, but it will cause another in another area because it just wasn't able to fit it in within its context.
Exactly. Exactly. So, okay. And like the industry is facing a unique dilemma right now. Like finding and onboarding developers is really harder than ever. Um so like from your perspective, what makes onboarding so challenging today? Like especially for the large projects.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, part of it is the educational side. So w- with with when it comes to, I guess, finding a job now and onboarding developers, the industry is in the process of changing, so it can create different forms of complication when it comes to finding individuals and or whether being hired, depending on what's end of the table you're sitting on. You know, and so like with this industry, it's clearly raised the bar for what it takes to be a developer. Now, it, it but there's a part of me that even kind of argues against that. Like I like to be devil's advocate in that sense where, well, now it's easier, right? To be hired, if anything, because you can pump out these projects and like you can create more. But part of doing that, depending on, I guess, where you're trying to get a job, they can also see that as like, all right, well,
Yeah.
now the barrier to entry is much higher because we're expecting more knowing that these tools are out there. So it depends on where you're going, right? And so there's this complication where you almost have these developers who, there's one side where they're too reliant on the AI, and there's the other side where they're just completely oblivious to it and they're falling short of the change in the industry where people are being expected to use this in the sense of, filling in the gaps of where they might of where their knowledge might be. So, for example, and especially depending on if it's, for example, with my current project, Luxera, we have a fairly large code base with it being a multi-vendor operation showing dealing both admin panels with a clinic and a patient. And obviously, the general payment processing side too. It can be pretty vast. And so I'll have these developers who will get through the interview process, uh, whether they knowledgeably did it or whether they used AI to cheat through it. I don't know. It's still kind of tough to get through. Um, for anyone who is hiring developers, what I recommend is just using more real world problems in the sense of like having them,
Hmm.
implement a feature that would be used versus just these algorithmic problems because AI can just pump those out, being there's plenty of resources to solve them. However, if you tie in the problem more specific to your use case, you can kind of get around or it'll be easier to kind of spot if they are using AI to get through the interview, whether you allow that or not. At this point, we've seen Meta just openly allow it, right, within their interviews. Um, but you know, with that being said, I have these developers who will then, all right, they get through that process, they enter this code base, and they get their first ticket, and they'll instantly start just using AI for the ticket. And part of me is just like, okay, cool, use AI. I kind of expect that, but to the extent that they're using it, it causes issues. Like, I had one developer who had to, create a new component and implement it to pre-existing features within the CMS, and they pretty much ran it through AI and it built a component. But as it did that, it changed other areas. It changed like a lot of different files of code that were used within different components, and it wasn't taking in full context. And through that, it broke our entire media component, which helped, render videos and different forms of media on the website. And I was just like, dude, this should have been just like a small PR, maybe with a single file included. No changes should have been made outside of it. And it just broke the code base. And I had to sit them down and I was like, look, like I'm okay with you using AI, but I didn't hire you to just be a prompt engineer, just to be someone who puts in prompts to the AI. Like anyone can really do that, in my opinion. Like I could do that. And in that case, that's where, going back to the barrier to entry for junior developers is being raised, is like these AIs will almost act like a junior developer. So therefore, like I can just prompt and give it a ticket and tell it what to do, and it'll give me an answer of a junior developer, and I'll review and do that. I'm not needing that of you. I'm expecting a little bit more here. I'm expecting you to be able to like take into more information than what the AI is willing to do, and you to guide it through. And
Hmm.
I had to sit down and I had to explain like, look, maybe if this was a smaller project, you might be able to get away with doing that. But because this is a large project, the AI is not going to be able to take in the context of everything. Therefore, before you start just plugging in everything to AI and or using AI, what I normally suggest to my developers is to first do the first couple tickets without AI. That way they get a good grasp of the code base and they're able to actually set themselves in a solid foundation that allow them to then be able to better problem solve and debug, as they use AI in the future, um, and to be able to better guide it because they can't guide it if they don't understand how the code base works, right?
Exactly. Amazing. What a lovely conversation. Yeah. And um, like, there's this tension, right? Like between human expertise and the machine assistance. So, in your experience, can AI ever replace the deep contextual knowledge a seasoned developer brings to a project, or does it always remain a kind of supporting actor?
I'd like to theorize and say that it can. That's the goal, right, of all these different companies is to eventually allow it to, NVIDIA was very open about being like, we want anyone to be able to code, meaning just being able to tell AI prompt and it be able to build things out. And I think eventually we'll reach there. However, it's not going to happen overnight. Um, one thing that people I think forget is that this is a very large industry, and industries don't just change overnight. And you know, so for the first part, I see it very much being like in following very much other patterns when industries change and develop. You know, first, the people on edge, we have our people who are at the edge of technology and they're testing. And that's where we're at right now. Like I still run across developers who are working on very large systems that aren't even aware of AI and or the different models. It's still, you know, we can get caught up in these like social media bubbles, whether you're on X or Facebook or Instagram, and we'll be fed what's within our space, and so we might being fed that AI's taken over, and like, oh, this is the next big thing, but like in reality, if you really talk down to people who are within the industry and are implementing, like they might be involved, but like there's still those who aren't, and it can be very expensive. Like we're already starting to see the infrastructure problems with running AI models, and you know, you have that, and that it's very expensive. Like countries, can we really run the energy that's needed to you know handle all these models? Not really, not at this stage, not at where we're heading. And then the second part is like it it costs businesses money to transition also. So now they're having to onboard and educate their team on these different AI models, different security practices, and they're having to find the right models to be able to use within their business. And then it comes down to, um, you know, the developers and getting them to the point to where they might not need a developer, but it's all very expensive and it's very slow. Like the only thing really holding back AI I mean, is really just like our structure, our like work, our industry as a whole as humans. And that's something that I think people forget to take into account when it comes to like AI disrupting and replacing an industry. Like that's not how things work. And all it takes is just a simple look back in history on different industries that have been disrupted. They don't happen overnight. They don't happen, which is why I encourage others like use these, get familiar with them because eventually they're going to be needed, but they won't ever replace like these heavily secure human interacted industries such as like healthcare and government sectors and different things like that. Just because of our view and trust with AI, right? We're already starting to see a lot of security issues pop up, and that's I imagine is only going to grow. So yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
hot take for sure. But
Uh, yeah, I agree. I totally agree on this. Yes. So, I mean, also like, I think that what you are saying underscores the need for the balance, like AI as the library, but humans as the interpreters who, um, uh, like decide like what knowledge matters most. So, um, yeah, true.
yeah, because it's a tool right now,
Mm.
but even when it does replace, it'll still be a tool. It's not like these things are going to be out and about walking. It's still like very much has a human interface to it. So, and a human interactable interface to it. So it's in the end, it'll always be a tool. It's just how advanced and how powerful the tool will be. And you still have to know how to use the tool. We still like um, we're still having people use Excel, and people are getting certificates and being very trained and educated in how to use Excel. And Excel replaced a lot of jobs, but Excel itself is a tool.
Exactly.
And it created a whole other industry. And I imagine, with being Excel sheets and people using them, and I imagine AI will be the same way. As much as we like to fantasize of the sci-fi reality of it, it'll be a bit. So we get there.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So, amazing, amazing, lovely. And like looking ahead, like, do you think AI will fundamentally change what it means to be a developer? Like, will we need fewer coders, or will the role simply evolve into something more strategic and design oriented?
Yeah, I think it depends on the business, right? I think for most of your businesses, it'll slim the need of developers in the sense now you might only need one or two developers versus a whole team because now those one or two developers will be more productive and they'll be able to accomplish more tasks. And then there'll be the other side where you have your companies that are more so on the bleeding edge of things, where they're wanting to use this tool even more, but in the end, it still requires a human. So now you're still needing more developers. So I don't necessarily think it'll cut, the need of developers. If anything, I think it'll balance itself out in the sense the businesses that don't need them will slim out, but then there will be many more businesses that will be brought in that will be using it and be wanting to um, implement it and develop it that'll need those developers because,
Mm.
uh, when it comes to building real production enterprise software, you still need to know how to code and how to build out those systems. And because, like, I mean, when you really sit back at the end of the day, how much of your time is really spent coding? Maybe like 30%, if that, is spent actually coding. The other 70% is built out problem solving, setting up the infrastructure, implementing product and taking in feedback and dealing with all that. So like, and so in that sense, just like, if anything, it'll just give you more time to do what developers, whether they realize it or not, are spending the majority of their time doing.
Mm. Got it. So, lovely. I mean, I really love that. I mean, it's not about fearing obsolescence. It's all about embracing the evolution. Like developers, just like businesses, must pivot and grow with the tools available. So,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, amazing.
exactly. And, there will be those developers who will get replaced and that you see getting replaced now. But, you know, those more oftentimes than not, at least with my experience, when talking with those developers that had been replaced, they were developers who were very stagnant, who weren't necessarily very passionate about their field, who were more so just like, and maybe you are someone who was replaced by AI and you are passionate about coding. And if that's the case, then I'm sorry. And that's a hard thing to do. And, it's hard to take that into account. But from my experience, those that I have met were individuals who very much stagnated in their career.
Yeah,
And yeah.
I agree. Definitely. Yeah. Lovely, Francisco. I mean, this was really has been such an eye-opening conversation. I mean, thank you so much for breaking down the nuances of AI in existing systems and the very real challenges of developer um, onboarding today. So,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And for all the listeners, like remember that AI is not here to replace us; it's here to augment us. But the human element, like our curiosity, adaptability, and creativity, it remains irreplaceable, right? So, if today's episode or today's discussion sparked new ideas for you, then share this episode with someone who's navigating the same challenges. And as always, keep nurturing both your mind and your life. So, with this hope, until next time, this is your host Avik signing off from AIBiz. And also, Francisco, like if someone wants to connect with you, what will be the great medium?
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead and please follow me on X. They can find me at, uh, what's just my name, Francesco Hayes, with an underscore at the end. And yeah, I'm trying to do better with posting more on there and making that my central area. Before it was LinkedIn and other platforms, but trying to move out that way. So by all means, reach out there.
Exactly, exactly. Great. So I'll put all the links into the show notes for easy reference, dear listeners. And until next time, this is your host Avik signing off from AIBiz. Thank you so much.